Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for a very special event, our public lecture. This is where we hear on a science topic of interest that's for the more general community, so those who might not have this science area in their expertise or are just curious can come and listen. I'm certainly very excited, which is, I'm just very excited about this one tonight, so I hope you will be too. Tonight we're going to hear from Folashade Agusto. She's from the University of Kansas, and she's going to talk about the triple whammy, exploring the effects of prescribed fire and rising temperature on tick-borne diseases. Recently, tick ranges have been expanding due in part to rising temperatures as consequences of climate change, increasing the risk of tick-borne illnesses, and necessitating practical ways of managing tick populations. I won't give away the punchline, so that's just an amuse-bouche to get you started. Okay, thank you. I'll just also mention Folashade is an applied mathematician in ecology and evolutionary biology department at the University of Kansas. She designs novel models to gain insights and mitigate the risk posed to the public health by emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases. Since 2017, she is engaged in a mobile training clinic in West Africa, visiting Ghana, Nigeria, and Senegal. The clinic involves training workshops for graduate students in ecology, epidemiology, and dynamical systems analysis using seed funds from the SIMPA, excellent, okay, through the African Mathematical Union. The mobile training clinic will be on the move to another African country in the summer of 2024 or 2025. So with that, thank you so much for coming to meet with us today. We can't wait to hear from you.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie, for the kind introduction. And we'll be going to Liberia in 2025. Yeah. And thank you to the organizers for this warm invitation. This is my first time in Switzerland and my third time in Europe. And thank you all for coming to this presentation. I was actually expecting 3 people here because it's the end of the day, so I'm glad that you're all here. So as outlined to my talk, I'm going to start with a brief introduction. I'll talk about ticks and tick-borne diseases, and I'll give some statistics about the disease. Then I'll talk a little bit about fire and prescribed fire. I'll present a couple of models on tick-borne diseases using impulsive differential equation, which captures the effect of fire. So specifically, I would present a model on Lyme disease, looking at the effect of fire intensity, low and high fire intensity. Then I'll talk about or present a model for tularemia with differential effect of fire. And here I will be presenting or looking at 2 tick-borne, 2 tick species, Amblyoma americanum and Dermacentus variabilis. Then I will present a model on ehrlichiosis with rising temperature. So in all of these models, I would present results of the simulations that we carried out, and then I'll close with a summary. All right, so what are ticks? So ticks are ground-dwelling arthropods, which feeds on some organisms or hosts in order for them to get nutrients to survive and then to reproduce. Now, this photo here shows a questing technique used by ticks in order for them to feed on a host. And so often you will find the ticks climbing onto the tip of a grass or a leaf, and then they wait patiently for a host to come by. And then when the host comes by, they then latch onto the host and crawl up to a convenient spot on the host. Crawl up to a convenient spot on the host, and then they will start feeding. So there are a couple of ticks of concern in the United States. So this tick is one of them. So this is Exodus scapularis, the eastern black-legged ticks. Other ticks of concern include Amblyoma americanum, Dermacentus Exodus pacifica. So if I mispronounce any word, just remember that I'm a mathematician and not a biologist. So we also have Rhipicephalus sanguinus. So that's the brown dog tick. Amblyoma maculatum, Dermacentor adosoni, and Dermacentor variabilis. So all of these ticks are found in different parts of the United States and at different times of the year. Now, in addition to this ticks of concern, we also now have Haemaphysalis longicornis. I did practice how to say that. So this is longhorn, the Asian longhorn tick. Now, this is becoming invasive in the country, so it's gradually spreading through the country. Now, the interesting thing about this tick is that it reproduces in two ways, one sexually and the other asexually by cloning itself. So a female will have as many as 200 tiny clones of itself. And when they start feeding on a mammal as large as a cattle, they can feed on it to the death until that cattle drops dead. So they are pretty nasty. So tick has complicated life cycles that span 2 to 3 years, depending on the tick species. And they have 4 different life stages: the eggs, the larvae, the nymphs, and the adults. The eggs are often laid in spring, so depending, for this case, Exodus scapularis, and it will emerge as larvae in summer, then it feeds on a host, and then in spring of year 1, it will emerge as nymphs, and then again, it will feed, needs a blood meal. And in fall of year 1, it emerges as an adult, and then in year 2, it will then lay its eggs, and then the cycle continues. So there are a couple of variety of hosts that the ticks feed on. So we have small rodents, and notice this bunch of ticks on the ear, and this huge engorged tick on the head of this rodent. So ticks would also feed on larger mammals like the coyote, deer. So again, notice the bunch of ticks on the ear of this deer. So it will feed on mammals such as raccoons, lizards. Notice the ticks. So these are engorged ticks on the neck of the lizard. Then we have birds. So it also feeds on bird. And so notice the 4 really big fed ticks on the birds. Other hosts include toad and other amphibians, and see how much the tick compared to the cap of a soda bottle. So it's really big, and it's filled with eggs. So other hosts, this is the last of the gross photos. So other hosts include humans, and so you can see the tick right there. Okay, so let me switch gear and give some disease statistics. So tick-borne illnesses from endemic and emerging pathogens have increased in recent times, as you can see in this figure. And this, of course, poses increasing risk to the public in the country. So as an example, Lyme disease, which is the famous tick-borne disease in the US, had gone from 4 cases per 100,000 people in the 1990s to 10 cases per 100,000 people in early 2000. And this risk, of course, continues to emerge as new pathogens are discovered. So this figure here shows the list of pathogens that were discovered between 1960 and 2020. Now, notice the cluster of ticks discovered between year 2000 and 2020. There are at least 18 established tick-borne diseases, from Lyme disease, the famous one, down to Rocky Mountain spotted fever, all the way down to Heartland virus and bourbon virus. Now, these 2 diseases are recently found or discovered pathogen. Now, unfortunately, the ticks are expanding their geographical ranges. So this is a map showing the distribution, the geographical distribution of Exodus scapularis and Exodus pacificus in 1996 and in 2020. So notice that in the eastern part of the country, Exodus scapularis has expanded its geographical range. Now, I should say that these two ticks are competent vector for Lyme disease, so one of the diseases I'll be talking about later on. So this expansion is not limited to the Exodus species. Amblyomma americanum is equally expanding its range. The figure on the left shows where you currently have Amblyomma americanum, while the figure on the right shows the projected expansion, future expansion of the ticks. And so notice that most of it is expanding northward in the northeastern parts of the country. Okay, I thought it was going to move. So I should say that these ticks are competent vectors for two of the other diseases I'll be talking about, tularemia and ehrlichiosis. Dermacentus variabilis is equally expanding its range. The figure on the left shows where it's currently found, and the figure on the right shows the future expansion of its range. And Dermacentus variabilis is a competent vector for tularemia. All right, so with this increased focus on tick-borne diseases, there has been an increased focus on how we might limit their prevalence and mitigate their risk. And so there are a couple of ways in which this can be done. So for instance, the Lyme Disease Association have this outreach program to educate the public on the risk and the danger of Lyme disease, and other tick-borne illnesses. And so they educate the public on ways to prevent the tick bites and also ways to carefully remove ticks from the body, because once the tick lodges its thingy in your body, you have to take a twister to kind of like twist and bring it out. So they educate the public on that and how to also carefully remove the ticks from your body. So other ways to mitigate the risk of tick-borne disease include vaccination, which unfortunately is not available for ticks. Another method to mitigate the risk include the use of pesticide. And so all of this method have their benefits and disadvantages. But what I'm going to be talking about, which is prescribed fire, not only reduces the tick population, but also have great ecological advantage. So what's prescribed fire? Prescribed fires are intentional fires, which are necessary for land and forest management. They are time-effective and also cost-effective because they can be applied on a large area of land all at once. And it's also efficient in killing off the ticks and destroying their leaf litter. So these are often done in spring, late spring and early summer. Now, the origin of prescribed burn in most of North America lies with the Native Americans, whom this is not just a practice, but it's also a cultural tradition that helps to maintain healthy ecosystem. And I should go back. And a couple of states and federal agencies are, of course, identifying the benefits of prescribed fire and are partnering with some of these Native Americans in certain regions of the country. Now, this photo on the left shows Melinda Adams. She's my colleague at the University of Kansas, and she's a Native American who you can see here is lighting the fire for a prescribed burn. And most of this burn are done on private land, as you see in this figure on the right, with Courtney Matson, who is an ecologist and the executive director for Native Lands Restoration Collaborative. And so this burn right now, right here, is done on, I think this is the owner of the house where the prescribed burn is being implemented. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about fire. So this is a historical fire frequency map from 1650 to 1850. And so this map is long before industrialization and increase in land use and climate change. So one thing to notice here is that the southern parts of the country burn more frequently compared to the western part of the country, and hence those crazy wildfires that you guys hear about, and the northeastern part of the country. Now, unfortunately, since the 1900s, there has been a decrease in fire frequency, as we see in these two figures showing the average area burn in New Hampshire and in Maine. And you can see by 1978, the amount of area burnt had greatly reduced. And so also in New Jersey, by 1980, there was pretty much nothing recorded. Now, if we look at ticks and fire and superimpose onto the fire frequency map the current location of Amblyomma americanum and the projected expansion of the ticks, we would have this figure on the right. So the black lines shows where Amblyomma americanum is currently found, while the gray lines shows where they are projected to expand towards, and you can see that the expansion is northward. I am not claiming that this expansion is due to the fact that these northern parts burn less frequently. So a couple of factors are responsible. One, migration of birds. I showed you that beautiful birds with all those ticks on it. So once the ticks are fed, they would often drop off and then go hide under a leaf litter and then lay all the eggs. And so a female can lay as many as 5,000 to 6,000 eggs. Yeah, really. That's why it's big. And so a colony can start from just one female. Another reason for this expansion could be climate change. And we all know that the globe is warming and warming up north. So all these factors put together might be responsible for this expansion that we're seeing. Okay, to my objective today. So I have 4 objectives. Number 1, to look at the effect of fire intensity and the burn duration on tick population and disease prevalence. So by fire intensity, I'll be looking at low intensity and high intensity. And by burn duration, I mean the time between the burn. So I don't mean how long it takes for a fire to die out once it starts. And I'll be looking at Lyme disease as my model disease for this question. So also, I'll be looking at the effectiveness of prescribed burn on the different spatial scenario, so using Lyme disease. Then I would look at determining the differential effects of prescribed fire on disease prevalence. So this involves me looking at us looking at 2 tick species, Amblyomma americanum and Dermacentus variabilis. And then lastly, I will consider the effects of prescribed burn on the rising, an environment with rising temperature. Okay, so let's start with the first question. So my model disease here is Lyme disease. Lyme disease is caused by Borrelia burgdorferi bacteria, which is transmitted by black-legged ticks. And so you can see the larvae, the nymphs, and the adults, male and female. And you can group into two the symptoms of Lyme disease. And so the early stage symptoms include rash, swollen lymph nodes, fever, chills, fatigue, and the famous bullseye rash. While the late stage symptoms, which comes with complications, include arthritis, nerve inflammation, heart problems, facial nerve inflammation. And so to address that problem, we created this very simple model. So I worked with Emily Gu, who was then an undergraduate student at Washington University at St. Louis. So this was during the COVID-19 lockdown. So Emily lives in Lawrence, and she reached out to me, and she's a biologist to DNA. So she had no math in her at all. And I said, do you trust me to drop you in the middle of the ocean and not get eaten by sharks? And she was like, sure. And so okay, how would you like to look at ticks and fire? She's like, okay, I trust that you have my back. And I'm like, sure. And so she created this extremely simple model, incorporating the different life stages of ticks. So you have the eggs, the larvae, the nymphs, and the adults. And then the interaction of the ticks with the rodents. So you have healthy rodents and infected rodents. So the ticks in the larvae, nymphs, and adult stages will become infected if they feed on infected rodents. And because there is no recovery for the ticks, so they would mature with infection as they mature through their life stages. So if they get infected as larvae, they will become infected nymphs and infected adults. Healthy susceptible rodents becomes infected if they're fed on by the larvae, the nymphs, and the infected adults. Now, with this model, we have the following system of ordinary differential equations. And this system is continuous up until the time when we apply fire. So remember, we're dealing with prescribed fire here. And when we apply fire, the tick population as well as the rodent population are reduced by certain proportion. And so that's the representation for the reduced proportion as a result of fire. So the next thing that we wanted to do was to parameterize this model. And so hence comes the difficult task of getting the fire-related data. And this is where Emily shows how amazing she is. And she talked to pretty much a lot of people, and she read a lot of papers and found this one paper that looked at high-intensity burn. And so this data, this paper is by Patkett et al., is a 2009 paper. And so it had this data for the larvae, the nymphs, the adults, and the rodents under a control environment and then under the prescribed burn environment. She also found another paper by Gilliam et al. It's a 2018 paper that talked about low fire intensity. And this paper only just have information about the larvae, the nymphs, and the adults under the burnt environment, and there are no information about the rodents. So using this data, we were able to determine the proportion reduced as a result of fire. And so by taking the difference between the control environments and the burnt environments and normalizing that by the total tick population. So that gave us that proportion that we were looking for. And then we used other parameter values from literature and simulated our model. And we had this results. So we focused on the infectious nymphs since they are aggressive biter and they pose the most risk when it comes to Lyme disease. So on the y-axis, you have infectious nymphs. On the x-axis, we have time, so we were implementing prescribed burn for a period of 6 years, just one time for a period of 6 years. The magenta line represents the low fire intensity, while the dashed blue lines represent the high fire intensity. So in the first year, before we implemented fire, you can see that the number is the same regardless of whether you're implementing low or high fire intensity. But in year one, once we have implemented fire intensity, you see the reduction in the tick population. And as we continue to implement fire, high fire intensity does better in keeping the tick population down, while the low fire intensity, we just see this continuous increase in the tick population. And so high intensity does better than low intensity. We then consider the impact of the duration. Still looking at low intensity and high intensity burn. And we consider 4 different scenarios. So the first one, when we burn every year for a period of 6 years, just one time for a period of 6 years, one time every 2 years for a period of 6 years, one time every 3 years for a period of 6 years, and just once in 6 years. And these are the results that we have for both low and high intensity. And you can clearly see that high intensity still does better in reducing the tick population. So if we burn every year at low intensity, we do a great deal better than if we burn at low intensity, if we burn every year at low intensity. And also notice that burning every 2 years at high intensity does way better than if we burn every 2 years at high intensity. So high intensity seems to do better than when we're considering the duration of the burn. Okay, so to the second question, which involves the effectiveness of the burn under different spatial environments. So these are spatial environments that the ticks can be found. And so we extended the model to include spatial dependency. So it's not just a function of time, but it's also a function of X and Y location. And then we added a diffusion term to model the dispersal across space. And we consider a solution in 2-dimensional rectangular domain, omega. So this is the model, the partial differential equation model, where we have suppressed that time and space dependency. And these terms here represents the diffusion rate. So one thing to note here is that we have used the same diffusion rate for the larvae, the nymphs, and the rodents population. And we use the diffusion rate for the deer for the adult population, since their preference is more to larger mammals. So again, this system is continuous up until the time when we apply fire, and we have a reduction in the tick and rodent population in the part of the domain that we are applying the burn. We use a constant diffusion to model this uniform dispersal across space, and this will be relaxed later on. And we simulated this model using a finite elements method package in MATLAB, which was developed by my colleague in the math department. And so this method discretizes the model in space, and it uses an implicit fifth order Radal 2A method in time. And so at this point, we now have data and parameter values to use to simulate this model. And so we start by considering a 30 by 30 square grid for our domain, and we implemented fire in a 10 by 10 square grid in the middle of the domain. So this is the result at T1, T3, and T5. And here you can begin to see the effect of diffusion as the ticks are diffusing back into the burns patch, and the area surrounding the burn has fewer number of ticks compared to the edges. And this becomes more obvious at T equals to 10. So you have fewer number of ticks in and around the burn patch compared to the edges of the patch. or domain. We then also looked at the percentage of ticks remaining as we increase the burn. So we see that as the burn increases, we have fewer number of ticks. We also considered the patch size. As the patch size increases, we see a decrease in the percentage number of ticks remaining, but so you see this diminishing return. So it's not as quick as what we have if the patch size is smaller. All right, so that is considering a homogeneous domain where ticks are diffusing at the same constant rates. So next, we look at this heterogeneous domain in order to capture the environments that ticks are found. And we considered two environments, grassland and wooded area. So in the grassland, temperature is high, humidity is low, and this is kind of like a hostile environment, and we assume that the diffusion rates of the ticks is slow. Unlike in the wooded area, even if temperature is high and humidity is low, the ticks would find a leaf litter to hide under. And we consider a 10 by 10 square grid on the diagonal of our domain. So this is what we have or had at t equals to 1, t equals to 3, t equals to 5, and here you can begin to see the effect of diffusion and the difference in the diffusion rates in the two patches at t equals to 10. And so here it becomes obvious that the wooded area, burning in the wooded area, we're able to reduce the number of ticks compared to when we burn in the grassland. All right, so that's the second question. Moving on to the third question, looking at the differential effects of fire. So here we'll be looking at two different tick species. And our disease of focus here is tularemia. So tularemia is caused by Francisella tularensis, which is a gram-negative Coccobacillus bacterium. Now, according to the CDC, they consider this a biological weapon because of the low dosage that leads to infection and its high dissemination rates as a result of a high and easy dissemination rates in an aerosol. And of course, also because of the potential to lead to death. And when it comes to infection in humans, there are a couple of routes of infections in humans. So transmission could be due to the consumption of contaminated food or water, handling of infected animals, bites from hematophagous arthropods like ticks, deer flies, and mosquitoes. So these are blood-sucking vectors. And so our focus is on ticks, the two different tick species. Transmission can also be as a result of contact with aquatic environments and inhalation of aerosol. And there are 6 different forms of the infection, depending on the routes of infection. Now, this is a 2010 geographical distribution of tularemia. You can see that periodic and common cases occur in North America as well as in Europe, while uncommon and sporadic cases are found in South America, Africa, and parts of Europe. So to address the question concerning the differential effect of fire, like I said earlier on, we look at 2 tick species, Dermacentus variabilis and Amblyoma americanum, and we use this extremely simple model as we've used before, and also consider their interactions with the rodent population. So the rodents will become infected if they are fed on by the infected ticks of the 2 species. And the ticks get infected if they feed on the infected rodents. We also considered infections in human, and we used the natural history of the infection by segmenting the population according to the disease status. So we have susceptible humans, exposed, asymptomatic, symptomatic, and recovered. And so I don't sound like a broken record. So this leads to a system of ordinary differential equation, which is continuous up until the time when we apply fire. And then there's a reduction in the tick population. So as a result, I'm not showing that system of equation, but rather going on to talk about the data that we used to obtain that proportion. So we were also fortunate to still be able to use the Gilliam 2018 paper because it has information about the two ticks that we were interested in. So simulating the model and looking at infected humans when we have fire and when we have prescribed fire, you can clearly see that in the absence of fire, we have more infected humans, and with fire, there are fewer number of infected human cases. And the same thing holds for the rodents. And here you can actually see that impulsive nature of our prescribed fire. So this is what we obtained with Dermacentus variabilis and Amblyomma americanum. And clearly you can see that differential effect of fire. So fire affects Dermacentus variabilis more than it does Amblyomma americanum. Now, to consider the effect of this differential effect of fire, or to clearly see this differential effect of fire, we consider the cumulative number of new cases due to each one of these ticks. So we consider that under when there's fire and when there's no fire. We fix every other parameters in that model except for the fire-related parameters. And so the black dashed line represents Amblyomma americanum in the absence of fire, while the cyan line represents Dermacentus variabilis in the absence of fire. The red curve is Amblyomma americanum with fire, so the only thing varying here is that proportion due to fire. And then the blue line is Dermacentus variabilis in the presence of fire. And so you can clearly see here that Amblyomma americanum contributes more new infection in human than Dermacentus variabilis. And the same thing holds for the rodent population. And so here we've clearly shown the differential effect of fire, which is more apparent on Dermacentus variabilis. There's so much biology stuff going on. All right, so to the last question, which involves prescribed fire in a rising environment. So my disease of focus here is ehrlichiosis. And what's ehrlichiosis? So this is a general name for a cocktail of bacteria caused by Ehrlichia. So we have Ehrlichia scheffensis, Ehrlichia wengi, Ehrlichia muris, or chlorensis. I hope I said that correctly. And just like Lyme disease, you can separate, there are two stages of the symptoms. So the early stages includes fever, chills, severe headache, muscle ache, confusion, and rash, which is common in children. And the late stage symptoms include damage to the brain or the nerve system, respiratory failure, uncontrolled bleeding, organ failure, and death. Okay. So, So I have this vegetable garden at home, and when I go out to my garden, there are no ticks there. But you should see the way that I go out there. I wear my boots, like nothing is crawling on me. So you can see why I am like that. So to model this, unlike the model that we've done for Lyme disease and tularemia, we actually now incorporate the host-seeking behavior of the ticks. So when eggs emerged, when the eggs emerge, they go into this hardening stage, and once they're in the hardening stage, once they have hardened, then they start questing for hosts. And then once they find a host, they start feeding on the host, and so they could get infected as a result of them feeding on the host. While they're feeding, they become engorged. And once they're engorged, fully engorged, they then drop off. And so this is also the case for the nymphs and the adults. Now, their maturation rates from larvae to nymph is impacted by temperature. And just like every other arthropods, so they're affected by temperature. The maturation from nymphs to adults is also influenced by temperature. And so with this, we have the system of equation for the eggs and the larvae, for the nymphs, and for the adults. And these are the equations for temperature, the temperature-dependent maturation rates, which, again, the system is continuous up until when we apply fire. And with fire, we see a reduction in the proportion of each of these different stages of the ticks. And so to determine the temperature function, the time-dependent temperature function, we downloaded from PRISM 2001 mean average temperature across Kansas. And we fitted a Fourier series to this to obtain the time-dependent temperature function. So this is the function that we have. This term here, omega, enables us to determine different temperature scenarios. And we consider 3 temperature scenarios. The first one when omega equals to 0, which represents the current temperature, and 2 other future temperature increases when omega equals to 2 and when omega equals to 4. And this temperature are higher, these 2 temperatures are higher than the worst case emission scenario projected by IPCC. So that's the International Panel for Climate Change. So the IPCC projected that the globe would warm by no more than 1.5 degrees centigrade by 2050 or 2080. So using this time-dependent function, we simulated our model with the other parameters that we have estimated from literature. And we considered 2 scenarios. So one, an invasion scenario where ticks are newly introduced into an environment, and an endemic scenario where ticks are already established in an environment. So with this 3 temperature, we see that in an invasion scenario, we see that as temperature increases, we see an increase in the number of ticks. Similarly, for the endemic scenario, as temperature increases, we see an increase in the number of ticks. So here again, we're focused on the infectious disease population. We then implemented fire. So I should say that we ran our simulation for just a year. We implemented fire, and in this case, we applied fire 4 times during the year, and you can clearly see this tremendous reduction in the number of ticks in this invasion scenario. And so also under the endemic scenario, you see this tremendous decrease even with the increase in temperature. So the next thing that we did, and this work is ongoing, we wanted to compare the outcome of using microtemperature with that of using the average monthly temperature across the states. And so we had a team of grad students go out to collect ticks, and they would record the temperature in the slots that they're collecting the ticks, and the temperature, humidity, and precipitation. And so I'm just taking one of those slots that they have collected the information, and this is the mean monthly temperature from one of those sites. And we fitted, so this is between September 2020 and June 2022, and we fitted a third order Fourier series to this data to obtain the time-dependent function, and then simulated the model in order for us to see and compare the outcomes of using the mean monthly temperature. So this is what we have. And so this clearly shows that using the mean monthly temperature underestimates the number of the ticks that we would have when we use the microenvironment. All right, and so we've gotten there. Yay. So to conclude, I have presented a couple of models for tick-borne disease using impulsive differential equations to capture the effect of prescribed fire. And we have addressed a couple of questions from fire intensity to the effect of rising temperature. And so we found that fire intensity has a higher influence on tick in reducing the tick population, and that it's better for us to burn at fewer times at high intensity than to burn often at low intensity. We also saw that when considering the domains that are suitable for ticks, that it's better to burn in an environment more suitable for ticks like the wooded environments, which would lead to fewer number of ticks at the end of the burn. With question regarding differential effect of fire, we saw that fire affects the Mersensis variabilis more than Amblyomma americanum. And that even with rising temperature, we can still be able to control the tick population, and regardless of what that increase in temperature is, even under extreme temperature rise, like 2 degrees centigrade or 4 degrees centigrade, fire still remains effective in bringing down the tick population. And in this case, we had focused on Amblyomma americanum, and I'm certain that's also the case for the other tick species. So before I close, I want to acknowledge my amazing team of students. So this is my wonderful Emily that started this whole tick and fire research. And so she was then at Washington University in St. Louis, and she's starting an MD PhD program this fall, which is, I'm super proud of her. And she continues to love working on ticks, and her direction on tick research is obviously different from mine. This is my amazing grad student, Alex, who graduated last fall. So Alex did all the complicated stuff with the PD and the temperature. And these are the awesome students from the Ghana modeling school that I ran. And so they worked on the differential effect of fire. And smiling in the corner there is Joshua, who is extending this work as part of his master's thesis, looking at incorporating stochasticity to the work that we've done. So I will close by acknowledging the support from NSF. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I need to take a shower. But you heard, grad students, you can go out and look for ticks too, so consider that in your pursuit of careers. Questions for the speaker? Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks very much for interesting presentation. I mean, it was a bit difficult to watch at sometimes, but it's not you, it's them. So I was just wondering, I know that quite a lot of animals change their behavior when they're infected by something to then facilitate spreading that parasite, whatever that is. I was just wondering whether that's also true for ticks, and if it was true, how would it be modeled mathematically? Would you do anything significantly different than what you do?
I am not sure about ticks affecting the pathogen affecting changing the behavior of the host. It could be possible. I know that for for malaria, which affects the behavior of the host. That I know. And I know the model is slightly different if you want to incorporate that. But that's a good question to look at. I've just been so carried away with the excitement of fire that, yeah. So I've done some work on malaria as well. So I understand what you're saying. But the excitement of fire. So, yeah.
Yes.
Hi.
You have to press the button, I think. Yeah.
This way?
Yep.
Okay. So thank you again. I was wondering how the model changes when you include predators with or without fire. So much potential.
Exactly. So much potential, and we're working on it. So we just submitted a paper this earlier, I think last month. And so I'm a project leader for a program done by SL Math. So this is in Berkeley, which involves some research program involving African Americans and those in diaspora like myself. And so for the model, we have incorporated the presence of predator. And the goal is to then incorporate fire into it. Yes. So we're on it. Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi. So you've mentioned positive effect of this controlled fire on the ecosystem. And can you name a few? Because to me, it sounds like you're burning the ecosystem essentially. What's the advantage doing that? Apart from killing the ticks, I mean.
So apart from killing the ticks, I showed the picture of my colleague who also does firework. And so one of the things that I have heard her say, and I've also read, is the fact that there are some seeds that would not germinate except fire had gone through, and then that would help them germinate. That aside, there are also some trees, like the Native Americans, they weave these baskets and make boats. I'm sure from the Western movies, you've seen Indians making boats. So those plants or trees that they use in making those boats, if fire doesn't go through, they don't get strong. So they get really brittle and they break easily. So, like I said, as long as the Native Americans are concerned, prescribed fire is a cultural tradition that helps them maintain the health of the ecosystem. And so in ways like that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I was wondering, many of the graphs you showed were either somewhat low resolution, like 30 by 30 square, or like a graph ending at about the 1 year line. So I was wondering, given the type of conference this is it expensive to run these simulations that you're doing? And do you think there's more you could learn if you had all the compute you could want?
So we run this on our laptop. But I do understand the question concerning, having high power resolution computer. One of the questions that we wanted to address, and we couldn't because of the fact that I didn't have enough money to sign up for the cluster in our university to use the thing, was incorporating the topology of the states into the model. And so so you have the beavers, you have what have you, and that involves taking a lot of computer power. And I didn't have that in my lab, even though I have a little bit more powerful computer than my laptop now, and I have that. But I don't have enough computer energy as I would have loved if we were to incorporate all the topology of the state into the model.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I was hoping to get everyone's interest in expanding this into high-performance computing. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. That was interesting.
Thank you.
You showed one map of the United States depicting areas where the problem of tick-borne diseases got worse in recent years, in the past years, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I noticed there, or thought to notice, is that some of the sharp lines were actually lining out mountain ranges, in particular in the West, like the Sierra Nevada, the Cascade Mountains. Could this be a climate change effect, such that ticks are just populating higher lying areas?
It's possible. I am not sure of the answer to that question, but it's possible. Since I have not been, so those pictures that I showed are done by from the lab of one of my colleagues, and I'm not involved in that research. So it's certainly possible. So I cannot give you a definitive answer.
More research questions. I love it. Please. Yes.
I'm very curious. This is wonderful. I have two questions. One is, it seemed like your mathematical model resembles at some stage the same SEER principle that we use for human disease modeling,
Yeah.
right? Mm-hmm. What I'm intrigued is that in your situation, how do you estimate the initial population? Because humans, we have a very good estimate of how many people can be there, but I'm not sure the population that you're dealing with, so there must be a lot of uncertainty. So that's one question. The second one that is really captured my imagination is the global distribution of tularemia that you showed. Mm-hmm. That is 15 years old.
Yeah, so that's...
Is there a broken, fragile surveillance system?
So I couldn't find any recent geographical distribution of tularemia. I couldn't. So that was the only, the most recent one I could find. But in one of the data from CDC, which showed a fewer number of, that showed the distribution of tularemia in the United States from the 1950s to recent times, as in 2020, you see this decline, and then you see this tiny little increase. I refused to, not refuse, I didn't show it in this talk. And so you see this uptick in cases. So to the question on the initial conditions for the ticks. So it's not just, it's a major issue, because how do we estimate that? And it's not limited to ticks. It's also a major issue when it comes to even looking at malaria and mosquito-borne diseases. So this is just a guess. And even with the guess, you can still see that the trajectory that we're seeing in the model still captures what the data that I had used to parameterize this model. So it's a major thing, and unfortunately, I do not have a more recent data for tularemia. Sorry about that.
Again, more research directions to pursue. And so we'll have our last question now.
Thank you for your speech, very interesting. I was curious about the fact that in theory you could define a cost functional related to the spread of fire in the country, for example. And have you tried applying optimal control strategy, for example, to say, okay, I want my population of ticks to go below a certain threshold, but I want to minimize this functional depending on the measure of area, for example, of fires?
Well, thank you for the research question. I really appreciate it. So I have been like, oh God, I really love this topic. What else can I do? So I just have a question that I can tackle. So yes, you're right. One could use optimal control. But one thing I do know is that trying to model fire itself is extremely difficult. And so in place of modeling fire, we model the effect of fire. And so that's just kind of a way to get around doing that. And this approach is not limited to me. So folks working on the effect of wildfire on savanna also uses this approach. So it's extremely difficult to model fire itself. But I like the idea of the optimal control. I also do optimal control in my research work. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, with that, let's thank our speaker again for a wonderful